Sorry. I'm thrilled that John B. Taylor is our speaker tonight, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to introduce him. In a few words, John is a world-renowned economist, respected for his forthright analysis and insight into complex issues of today's global economic system. But a few details are in order to properly introduce John. Since 1984, he's been a professor of economics at Stanford, as we've already heard, and a George P. Shultz Senior Fellow in economics at the Hoover Institution. His fields of expertise include macroeconomics, monetary economics, and international economics. He is known for his research on the foundations of modern monetary theory and policy, which have been applied by central banks and financial market analysts around the world, applying the so-called Taylor rule, among many other things. John has served on numerous governmental advisory boards, including as senior economist on the President's Council of Economic Advisors. From 2001 to 2005, he was Undersecretary of the Treasury for International Affairs, where such issues as currency markets, trade and financial services, foreign investment, international debt and development, and oversight of the IMF and World Bank, as well as coordinating G7 financial policy, were all on his plate. John is a prolific author. His recent book that Dana mentioned, Getting Off Track, How Government Actions and Interventions Caused, Prolonged, and Worsened the Financial Crisis, is really an important book, and I highly recommend it. It's available on Amazon. It shows that he tells it like it is, and like he sees it, even if he's critical of an administration he has served and is involved with. You have to learn more about John and see his website, johnbtaylor.com, listing his many books and articles and some videos on his discussions at various folks' shows on television. I want you to be careful, to listen carefully tonight. We do plan on a test at the end of the evening. With great pleasure, let me introduce Dr. and Professor John B. Taylor.
Thanks for coming. It's really an honor and a privilege for me to be here with you. I have a tie. I forgot to wear it tonight. It says democracy is not a spectator sport. And I really believe that, and it's right here tonight. I must say, David, what a speech. One of the nice rewarding things about being a teacher, which I am, is you have students like that you can be proud of that. Thanks. I'm really proud. Thank you. I've been studying the financial crisis for a long time, actually, since before it began, back in 2007. And what I tried to do is look at the facts, look at the numbers, try to really understand what was going on. That book that Raymond mentioned and Floyd held up was actually one of the first books on the financial crisis. And what I tried to do is not really about who said what to who when. That's important, of course. But it's really looking at the numbers, looking at the facts, looking at the sequences of what happened, what people did, what the markets did. And I actually came to a conclusion on this systematic examination of the facts and the numbers that I think is quite striking, and really is the subtitle of the book and the book itself. But what I found is that when you divvy up the questions about the financial crisis that we've gone through and are still going through into three parts: what caused it, what prolonged it for so long, it actually started flaring up in 2007, and what made it so bad in the panic period in 2008, which led to this recession. In each case, what I find comes to the top of the list is some kind of government intervention or government action. So that's the reason for the title of the book, Getting Off Track: How Government Actions and Interventions Cause, Prolong, and Worsen the Financial Crisis. So I'd say that's what I want to tell you about. And I think it's very important to get an understanding of what went wrong before we try to make proposals on how to fix it. It's quite ironic that Congress set up a Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission to look at what the causes of the crisis. That's the commission supposed to report next December. And in the meantime, we have legislation running through Congress that's sort of paying no attention to the commission. They set up themselves. Certainly it makes sense to see what caused it before you go ahead. So I'd like to sort of explain this in sort of a big picture terms. Economists are always calling things great. So we abuse the term great, quite frankly. There's the Great Depression, of course, that we all know about. Economists also sometimes talk about the Great Inflation, or Great Stagflation of the 1970s. We had a recession every 3 or 4 years, a double-digit inflation, double-digit interest rates, and basically that lasted through the 70s until the 80s began. That's the Great Inflation. We also have this term, the Great Moderation, which really refers to how things got so much better in the early 80s. The tax reductions, the focus on the Fed to get inflation down, the deregulation movement, all those things actually were quite successful and led to these really remarkable expansions. 1980s, long expansion in peacetime at that time. 1990s, again, that's the longest expansion in American history. We had a recession in 1990-91, which was very mild. The recession in 2001 was very mild. Of course, we now have the end of that Great Moderation period into what's now called another great, the Great Recession, which is this bad recession that we're still going through. So I want to use the word great one more time to describe what I see as the problem here. I want to refer to something I'm going to call the Great Deviation. What do I mean by the Great Deviation? I mean a series of policy changes that deviated from what was working quite well beginning in the early 80s, continuing through most of the 90s into the start of this century, and we got off track. So this deviation, I call it the Great Deviation. And simply put, what I think happened is this Great Deviation, which I'll try to explain and list the characteristics of it. This Great Deviation killed the Great Moderation, that long expansionary period we had, and gave birth to the Great Recession. I think that's the best way to think about my overall theme here. And that Great Deviation has to do with government policy getting off track. So let me go through a list. I'm going to actually try to list 10 items, 10 policy items that I want to put under this rubric of the Great Deviation, this Great Deviation from what things that were working well before government got off track. I want to start with the cause, if you like, the first deviation, and I think that is monetary policy. Monetary policy in the United States, as you know, is run by the Federal Reserve Board. You have a chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, you have a board, and you have presidents around the country who participate in that. In San Francisco, we have now Janet Yellen, who is a member of the committee that decides on interest rates. She's actually now going to be the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. So the Federal Reserve Board is responsible for setting interest rates. The chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, of course, now Ben Bernanke. But the period I'm going to refer to was the period when Alan Greenspan was the chair. So what happened? Well, during the Great Moderation period of the 80s and the 90s, monetary policy was operated in a very smooth and systematic way. When inflation picked up, interest rate was increased, as it should be. In fact, that's what the so-called Taylor rule says that Floyd is referring to. When inflation goes down, interest rates are reduced. When the economy goes into a recession, interest rates are reduced by a certain amount. And that worked very well, again, for a long, almost 25-year period. Very good economy. Before the policy got off track. If you recall, interest rates at that time got very low, especially for the recovering economy we had, and especially for inflation already picking up. And they remained low for roughly 2002, 2003, and 2004. 1% interest rates and then rising very slowly. Those were much lower based on comparisons with 1980s and 1990s than they should have been. So there were monetary excesses, if you like, too much money,